No one is born a queen, much less a villain. But Athaliah was born into the crossfire between power and perdition. Daughter of King Ahab and the dreaded Jezebel, names that even the wind avoids pronouncing, she grew up in Samaria, capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. There, from an early age, she was taught that the throne is more than a place of honor. It's a battlefield, and whoever falters, falls. Her childhood had no fairy tales. There were sacrifices to strange gods, forced alliances and palace intrigues. While other girls played with dolls, Athaliah learned to use words as a weapon. The example came from her mother. Jezebel was fire and ice at the same time. She confronted prophets, manipulated kings, and moved the kingdom as if she were playing pieces on a chessboard. Athaliah watched everything with attentive eyes, and she kept it. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any videos. If you like the content, feel free to support our work with a financial aid by clicking on the Thanks a Lot button. You can also become a member of the channel and enjoy exclusive benefits. On the outside, she was just another royal princess. On the inside, she was shaped like a stone that withstands the rain. Silent, firm, determined. No one there knew that this young woman had a much bigger plan than being a king's wife. She wanted to reign alone, but to do so, she had to leave Samaria. She needed to go beyond the borders of her people, to cross the boundaries of the kingdom of Judah, where David's lineage was still strong and where Yahweh was still worshipped as the only God. It was then that an opportunity arose that would change everything. A marriage. Not for love, of course. Love wasn't part of the game. It was pure politics, an alliance between enemy kingdoms. Athaliah was promised to Jehoram, son of King Jehoshaphat of Judah. And like one who casts nets into the sea, hoping for a good catch, she set sail. The journey to Jerusalem wasn't just long. It was symbolic. Athaliah was leaving behind the palace where she grew up, the altars of Baal, her mother's intrigues, the muffled cries of the persecuted prophets. But she carried all this inside her, like someone who carries a perfume that is too strong, that sticks to the skin and doesn't come off even with time. As she crossed the gates of Judah, the foreign princess's eyes were already scanning the territory with coldness. This was not a new home. It was territory to be conquered. The people welcomed her with celebration, of course. After all, an alliance between Israel and Judah was rare and full of promise. It was as if two worlds had finally put aside their spears to toast with wine. But you only had to look closer to realize that Athaliah's smile didn't say peace. It said wait. Jehoram, her husband, was the typical prince raised in his father's shadow. He had royal blood, but his eyes lacked sparkle, and that's when Athaliah saw her chance. As the eyes of the people turned to the new royal couple, she began to sow her influence into the corners of the palace. Sweet words, careful advice. Until Jehoram's decisions began to carry her tone. The days went by, and little by little Judah changed. Nothing too scandalous at first. An altar here, a permit there. But what seemed small was only the beginning. Athaliah wasn't there to be a decorative wife. She wanted to shape Judah in her image, and the image she carried came straight from the dark days of Samaria. And while the people were still getting used to the new queen, deep inside the throne, faith in Yahweh was beginning to show signs of weakness. And Judah, little did it know, that the roots of the north were spreading silently. Everything seemed under control until the day Jehoram took the throne as king. Then the game really began. Jehoram was finally crowned. The people applauded, the musicians played, the temple echoed with words of blessing. But deep down, it was Athaliah who really smiled. Now the king was her husband, but the command? That was already in her hands. Jehoram was king in name, but it was Athaliah who breathed decisions into his ear, and she blew calmly, like someone who lights coals on dry cloth. First came the rapprochement with the gods of the north. Then came the concessions. Strange altars began to appear here and there, at first discreet, then wide open. Yahweh's temple was no longer the only place of worship. The smell of incense burning for Baal began to mix with the Jerusalem air. The people were surprised, yes, but they also kept quiet. After all, questioning the king's decisions was dangerous, and everyone knew that behind the king there was a queen who didn't tolerate opposition. Those who tried disappeared from the squares, lost their positions, and suddenly fell silent. Meanwhile, Athaliah moved around the palace like someone who was born there. She was no longer the princess from outside. She was now part of the court, of the blood, of the power. She organized, influenced, and decided. And Jehoram, already accustomed to his wife's strong presence, didn't even realize that the throne he sat on was being shaped to fit her perfectly. But Jehoram's reign was not a bed of flowers. In fact, it was a succession of problems. Wars, revolts, disease. Everything seemed to go wrong, and in the midst of the chaos, a son grew up, Ahaziah. Raised watching his father retreat and his mother advance, Ahaziah learned the ropes of who was really in charge. And when Jehoram fell ill and his days began to shorten, Athaliah's shadow stretched further down the palace corridors. The throne was about to change owners again, and this time the power game was going to get even more dangerous. When Jehoram died, the mourning was silent. There was no denying it. His reign had been marked by defeats, idolatry, and mistrust, but even before the throne cooled, Ahaziah was already being crowned. Young, inexperienced, easily impressed. He was like a newly lit candle in the middle of a strong wind. And the wind, in this case, was blowing from his mother's side. ATALIA didn't just advise him, she shaped him. Every step he took, every decision he made, carried her voice behind it, and she knew exactly what to say. She had spent a lifetime observing kings and prophets, learning the shortcuts to power. Now, with her son on the throne, she ruled in disguise, but with a firm hand. Ahaziah followed the ways of Ahab's house, of his own mother's house. He got close to the kings of the north, got involved in dangerous alliances, and completely ignored David's tradition. Before long, his image before the people was a mixture of doubt and disappointment. He didn't look like a king of Judah. He looked like a foreigner sitting on the wrong throne. It was during this confused phase that he decided to visit King Joram of Israel, who had been wounded in a battle against the Syrians. The trip seemed simple, fraternal, and political. But behind this gesture there was a trap that no one saw coming. Jehu, a commander chosen by God to overthrow Ahab's house, was waiting. And the meeting between the two kings turned into a massacre. Ahaziah tried to flee. He ran, hid, sought shelter. But it was no use. He was found and killed, as if he were just another name on Jehu's list. The king of Judah had fallen. Again. The news spread like lightning all the way to Jerusalem. The people were shocked. The throne was empty. David's descendants were under threat. And Athaliah didn't cry. She wasn't the type to be shaken, quite the opposite. When chaos struck, she saw the perfect opportunity to do what no one expected. The palace was silent when the news arrived. King Ahaziah was dead. No ceremony, no warning, no heir prepared. All that was left was emptiness and fear. But in the midst of the mourning and confusion, one figure walked with firm steps through the corridors. Athaliah. She didn't hesitate. She didn't shed a tear. On the contrary, she saw the perfect breach in the chaos. Without wasting any time, she gathered the soldiers, called in the officers, and did something that not even the coldest of people expected. She had all the royal descendants killed, all the sons, grandsons, nephews, anyone who had David's blood running through their veins. It was a dry, cruel blow, like a blade that cuts all at once. What had once been a sacred line of kings now looked like a devastated field. ATALIA didn't want rivals. She wanted the throne. And to sit on it, she had to ensure that no one else could claim the right to rule. With her shouts muffled by the palace walls, she proclaimed herself queen, the only woman to reign in Judah, but not by acclamation, by force, by fear. The people watched, stunned. No one dared raise their voice. It was as if night had fallen over Jerusalem, and no one knew when it would light up again. Athaliah took the throne with the coldness of someone who had already planned everything. The altars to Baal were erected again. The temple of Yahweh was set aside. Prophets went into hiding. Faith was silenced. But as she celebrated her new power, thinking she had eliminated the entire royal lineage, a tiny spark escaped from her eyes. A baby, a single baby boy, saved by brave hands, hidden where no one would dare look. Inside the temple itself, where Athaliah would never have imagined, hope was still breathing, very quietly, but alive and growing. In the midst of the slaughter ordered by Athaliah, when all seemed lost, and David's lineage seemed to have been erased for good, someone decided to act. Jehosheba, Ahaziah's sister, saw the danger approaching and did not stand idly by. She knew that among the victims was a baby still in her arms, little Joash, the son of the murdered king. Without a second thought, Jehosheba took him in her arms, wrapped him in simple cloths, and together with her husband Jehoiada, the high priest, took the boy to where no one would think of looking, the temple, the very place that Athaliah despised. There, in the silent and sacred corridors, Joash was hidden. He grew up among the utensils of the altar, listening to the ancient stories of his ancestors' faith, learning to walk among the Levites, and breathing in the hope that only survives in secret. While the world outside worshipped Baal and bowed to Athaliah, inside the temple a new king was being formed, without a crown, without a crowd, but with purpose. For 6 whole years Athaliah reigned, unaware that a threat slept just a few meters from her own decrees. The temple was, for her, a forgotten place, a symbol of a time she wanted to erase. Little did she know that that time was being rebuilt by the hands of a patient priest and a courageous woman. Joash didn't yet know what awaited him. He was only a child. But every step he took inside the temple was a step that fate was guarding. Joiada, the priest, knew this. He was waiting. He prepared himself. Like someone tending a seed in the middle of the desert, he nurtured the boy with faith, truth, and courage. Meanwhile, outside, Athaliah felt the throne growing firmer and firmer under her feet. Without realizing that, right under her nose, the ground was already beginning to crack. For 6 years, Athaliah reigned alone, no king at her side, no legitimate descendant in sight. On paper, she was sovereign. But in practice, she ruled with iron fists and a heart that no longer beat for Judah, only for herself. Altars to Baal were proudly erected in the center of the city. Sacrifices to foreign gods became part of the routine. The temple of Yahweh, where feasts and songs once echoed, became almost a forgotten warehouse. The Levites walked in the shadows, and the prophets disappeared. Athaliah didn't just rule, she rewrote the soul of the people. Like dark paint thrown over an old mural, she covered everything that reminded her of the covenant with God. She didn't just want to rule, it wanted to erase the past, but not everything obeyed force. Behind the walls of the temple, there were whispers. Some still remembered the promises made to David, some were still waiting, and in the midst of all this, Joash was growing up. He was curious, he asked questions, he watched. And even though he didn't understand everything, he knew he was carrying something special. Joiada, the priest, didn't say much, but every gesture, every look seemed to teach him a silent lesson. Those walls, that temple, that hiding place, they weren't just shelter, they were a school. And Joash, without even knowing it, was a student on a much bigger mission. Outside, the people were gloomy. There were no more celebrations. The glow of the holy city had faded. But Athaliah, wrapped in her rituals, bathed in gold and pagan perfumes, believed she was in control. She didn't notice the weariness on their faces. She didn't hear the whispers in the streets. And even less did she imagine that right under her feet, inside the abandoned temple, plans were being drawn up. Because one thing is certain, no matter how dark the night, the day always finds a way to rise. Jehoiada waited. He waited like someone who knows the time of the seasons. She knew she couldn't rush into anything. That one wrong step could cost not only Joash's life, but also the last hope of the people of Judah. But time passed, and when Joash turned 7, the priest's eyes said what his mouth was silent about. Now, he began to move, little by little. He summoned the Levites, gathered the temple guards, called the faithful leaders who still remained. People who had remained silent out of fear, but who deep down longed to see Judah at peace. And one by one, they entered into the plan. It was a Saturday. The temple, on the surface, was as it always was, calm, quiet. But inside, it was boiling. Swords were distributed. Doors were locked. Each group knew its place. It was as if the entire sacred space had been transformed into a battlefield about to explode, only in silence. Then Joash appeared, dressed like a king, with a crown shining on his boyish hair, small in size, but a giant at the time. Jehoiada introduced him to the people inside the temple. "Here is the king's son," he announced, and the sound that followed no one could hold back. Clapping, shouting, trumpets, a roar that broke the silence of 6 years. The people erupted in joy, like someone waking up from a nightmare. The guards surrounded the boy with respect, and there, in the middle of the crowd, the improbable happened. Joash was crowned. Outside, Athaliah heard the noise. She ran to the temple, pushing past the guards, trying to understand. When she saw the boy on the altar, surrounded by the people, she understood everything at once. Her eyes went wide. The blood seemed to freeze in her veins. And the only thing she managed to shout was a torn, desperate scream. "Betrayal! Betrayal!" Atalia's scream echoed like a thunderclap out of time. "Betrayal! Betrayal!" she screamed, tearing at her own clothes in a desperate gesture. But no one ran to calm her down. No one came to her defense. The people who had feared her eyes and her decrees for so long now looked at her with silence and contempt. There, in the middle of the temple, with Joash standing before the crowd, she was no longer the queen. She was just a woman under siege, a mistake that time was correcting in front of everyone. The guards didn't hesitate. Jehoiada gave the clear order, "Don't kill her here, in the holy place. Take her outside." And so it was done. Athaliah, who had once entered that palace with her head held high, was now dragged outside the walls, not as a monarch, but as a threat. She tried to fight back. She tried to appeal to her family name, to the blood she carried, but it was too late. The people would not forget what she had done. The blood of the king's children still cried out from the earth. And now, at last, the echo was being heard. Outside the temple gates, at a point where the stones no longer protected and where the sacred could not reach, Athaliah was executed, without ceremony, without applause. The woman who had ruled with a hard hand, who had tried to erase David's lineage, fell into the silence that she herself had imposed for years. Inside the temple, Joash watched everything with the eyes of someone who still didn't understand how big it was. But the people understood. Jehoiada understood. It was the end of a dark cycle. And there, amid trumpets and renewed promises, Joash was officially placed on the throne. A boy king, a new beginning. But being crowned is only the first step. Reigning, that's another story. And Joash, despite his youth, would have to face his own paths, choices and trials, because the crown may be light at first, but the weight comes with time. The throne was occupied again. Joash, with his 7 years and watchful eyes, was now king of Judah. The people cheered him on, but deep down everyone knew that it was Jehoiada, the priest, who held the reins. He was more than an advisor. He was the keeper of the promise, the man who protected David's line when all seemed lost. In the early years, Joash did the right thing. He tore down the altars of Baal, restored the temple, brought back the songs, the feasts, the joy that Jerusalem had forgotten what it was like. It seemed that the light had finally shone on Judah again. But time tests even the best intentioned, and as Joash grew up, the decisions became his. Jehoiada grew older, the boy became a man, and the man king through and through. Athaliah, even dead, left her mark, not just in the halls of the palace, but in the choices that followed. Her name became a bitter memory, her story a warning. But even so, some of the seeds she planted remained hidden in the soil of the people's hearts. And one day, with Jehoiada gone, these seeds began to sprout again. Joash, the king who began by restoring everything, found himself surrounded by sycophants. He began to listen to crooked advice. He began to distance himself from the God who sustained him when he was just a baby in hiding. And little by little, the line between right and wrong became blurred. The story that began with a miraculous rescue and a cry for freedom was now heading down dangerous paths, as if the weight of the crown had become more difficult than it seemed. And that's when you stop, take a breath, and look at everything that's left behind. Because Athaliah's story, with all its darkness, still speaks to us. And what it reveals, well, that's worth thinking about. The story of Athaliah is not just about a woman who took the throne. It's about what happens when power becomes an end in itself. She was born among kings, grew up with the example of a mother who commanded more than many men, and learned from an early age that in order to win, you had to control. And she did it. She rose to the top, eliminated rivals, reigned firmly. But she lost everything, because power without purpose destroys wherever it goes. Athaliah wanted to erase Judah's history. She wanted to break David's lineage, but even with all her efforts, one baby escaped. Just one baby. And that alone was enough to show that when God has a plan, no darkness can stop the light from being born. In the end, Athaliah fell alone, without allies, without support, without honor. And the lesson is there, very clear. Those who build empires by stepping on others, one day step on the wrong one. The force she used to conquer was the same force that turned against her. But the lesson isn't just for those with crowns. It's for everyone who, at some point, has let themselves be guided by the fear of losing control. It's for those who think they can do anything to stay on top. It's for those who forget that every decision builds a path, and that one day you always go back the way you came. At the same time, the story is also about hope, about what happens when someone chooses to protect, even in silence. Jehosheba, Jehoiada, Joash, they were all part of a plan that resisted in the midst of chaos. And this is what remains. As long as there is someone willing to guard what is right, the truth will always find a way to return. Because kings pass, queens fall, thrones wear out, but promises made by God never fail. If you liked Athaliah's story and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming, be sure to like this video and share it with those you love. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any new content. Together, let's explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.